Hey everyone, this is Mike Dunn, and you are listening to Rethinking EDU. This is I think it's our fifth episode. Is that right, co-hosts? Does that sound right?
Sounds good to me.
Okay. So we're on our fifth episode in season 2, and we're here talking about networks of schools in particular. And I'm here with my amazing co-hosts, Matt, Julie, and Janine. How you all doing this evening?
Awesome.
I'm great.
Good.
Nice. Okay, y'all want to check in? Matt, what's going on with you tonight?
Just trying to stay sane in the midst of this pandemic, trying to get outside, go for nice long walks, absorb the sunlight, breathe the fresh air in.
Nice, I hear that. What about you, Janine?
I'm trying to make sure that my kids are doing school, but at the same time, learning something new without having to be on the computer. So there's been a lot of interesting projects happening around my house and probably causing a lot of a mess, but that's okay.
It's kind of awesome. Julie, what's going on with you?
I'm just really excited to be here tonight because a significant portion of my thought tribe is here.
That's awesome. And yeah, I'm here at home as usual. We started our presentations of learning at my school this week. It's been awesome. Looking forward to 29 more in the next 8 days. It's gonna be great. And we're also here with one of our friends and mentors and professors from Northeastern University, Dr. Chris Unger. Welcome, Dr. Unger.
Hey, hello. Glad to be here.
So, before we get into this episode, Dr. Unger, I've got a question for you.
All right, let's go. Lay it on me.
Over the past couple years that the four of us have gotten to know you, we've all called you Dr. Unger because, this is the usual studently thing to do, right? You get a professor in a class, Dr. Unger, yada, yada, yada. And we recently had a conversation, and at the end of the conversation, I was like, oh, thanks, Dr. Unger. And you sort of laughed at me, and, we signed off and whatever. And so it got me thinking, if not Dr. Unger, what do we call you?
Well, as long as we're friends, you can call me anything.
Fair enough.
Right,
Okay.
Right. But, I think the reason I laughed is because, it's taken me for a while to be called Dr. Unger. And it's kind of interesting, too, now when I go into hotels and I go on, airline calls or something, and they say Mr. Unger. I'm like, whoa, wait a minute now. I'm Dr. Unger. But, the reality, part of the reason I share this story, and this is kind of like I've been thinking about this conversation tonight, and as all of you were in the entrepreneurship class that I teach at Northeastern, and I think that sort of a start off to this conversation is what happens when I teach it in person on campus. I get anywhere from 30 to as many as 65 educators from across the country, and the first question I ask is, I assume you went into education to make a difference. And I would assume, and I think, and everybody's listening, that, yes, I went into education to make a difference. And then I always ask, are you making that difference? And the unfortunate thing is, and we can get into this if you want to, is that a lot of people kind of hem and haw and say, well, I'm really not making the difference that I was hoping to make, which is kind of a sad commentary on what we see in schools and school systems, more so in some than others, that there are teachers who went in to make a difference and really support students and so forth. And depending on your circumstances, there may be particular policies or curriculum or mandates and structures and cultures of systems and schools that don't really give you the freedom and leeway to make the difference that you really wanted to make with students. And so
right.
I'm standing there literally. I remember 4 or 5 years ago, 65 students in this large classroom, or not classroom, but space that I had found on campus, and said, so do you really want to make the difference you intended to make? And people say, yeah. And I said, well, do you want me to kick you in the rear end now and get you to start thinking about how you can start making that difference in the next 2 or 3 years? Or do you want to ask yourself that question about in another 20 or 30 years? Because and I think that's a big eye opener. And the reason I'm telling this story in the commentary to the conversation is I basically look out to the class and I say, look, this is about you being a change agent in education. This is about you coming to terms with what you want. I mean, this is going to sound totally out there, which is probably why you guys invited me to do this. So I'm going to lay it out there and lay it, just tell it like I see it.
I'm ready.
You've got one life to live. And if you're going to live it, my big question to anybody and everybody, whether you're in education or not, is what is the difference in the world you want to make? And what's the life you want to live? And let's stop just, being on the treadmill or just making money. And let's ask ourselves, what does living my best life look like? And in the class, we start to talk about that, which sounds crazy, but that's a reality. And I think that's why I kind of get shaky about being called Dr. Unger, because I then share with the class that I'm not unlike them. I'm also living in these ecosystems that are trying to, of people and places that are trying to make a difference in the world and change what schooling and learning and education and relationships with youth and families looks like. So I am no different than you. I am also trying to be a change agent in the world. So I'm not someone who has all the answers. I'm trying to figure it out just like you. So in that sense, I'm not Dr. Unger. I'm just Chris, another guy trying to make a difference in the world.
I would also argue that by planting that same seed that you're talking about right now is there's a power relationship that exists in schools that requires students that has been historically informed for hundreds of years in a lot of cases, that requires students to address their person who's the teacher by some sort of formal form, a Mr., a doctor, a miss, a Mrs., or whatever it is. When I started teaching at my current school, I had always taught at schools where they referred to me as my first name, Mike. And when I started teaching my current school, it was Mr. Dunn. And it took me probably 6 to 8 months to actually reprogram my brain to be accepting of being called Mr. Dunn. I think that speaks a lot to something that I see in education, and also the reason why I think I should call you Chris, right?
You should. Or you can choose to call me whatever you want, but Chris is good.
So before we get into it, Chris,
yes.
Let's just do a quick, brief overview for folks out there that are listening that have no idea who you are. So you teach in Northeastern University's Graduate School of Education.
Yep.
You also co-lead Northeastern's NExT initiative, which is something we hope to talk about tonight.
Yep.
NExT initiative is an experiential learning educator network.
Yep.
And I would say, and correct me if I'm capturing this correctly or not, your purpose in working at Northeastern with NExT, and also your life purpose, is to inspire and empower educators and education leaders to disrupt what is happening in maybe typical status quo teaching, learning, and schooling. And just to plug your efforts, you've worked with hundreds of schools, countless of students, districts, departments of education all over the country to try to highlight what some of the amazing things that are going on in schools are. You want to add anything to that?
Yeah, no, I guess I'll try to build on it. I mean, there's so many directions we can go in here, but I think, in the time that we have, you framed it in terms of can you speak to the power of networks? And you, at the very opening, you said, these network of schools. My thinking is changing a little bit, so part of this, power dynamic and relationship building and knowing each other is to be very upfront with everybody else, is saying, I don't have the answers. I have ideas. I'm trying to make a difference. I'm continually rethinking how I can make a difference, how I can work with others to make a difference in the world, how we can change the face of education. So I actually am going to, I do think that there's huge power of networks, which I can get into. And I think that's really, really, really important. But probably superseding that above all is the power of relationships. And I think that, like, this is why, I got big love for you guys. Thumping my chest, because I saw in you, right? I mean, is that louder? I see in you, like, there is something that I saw in each of you who basically, there's a resonance around these ideas. Like, I shouldn't just go through the motions and just allow for the status quo to continue. But I'm on this earth. I'm here to do something. I'm here to make a difference. And I'm going to find my way and see how I can make that difference. And there's a lot of us. There's a lot of educators, really great, meaning, educators that care for kids, want to do right by kids. And I don't know, I wanted to kind of send this message out, and I'm not sure where this will go, but, I feel like one of the most beneficial things that would be helpful for educators is to come to, it's sort of like an empowering paradigm or schema, or however you want to frame it, a perspective, which is to take the fish and water perspective. I know that's kind of out there. But the point being is that, fish aren't basically swimming around in water saying to themselves, I mean, this is nothing new. I'm using somebody else's, jargon here, but whatever. They're not saying, oh my goodness, I'm in water and it's not really that healthy and I don't like it. And why couldn't it be cleaner? And I want to get out of here. Like, this is not good, right? Well, educators, particularly when you're young, I think you get older, you kind of see this, but not all the time. These ecosystems, and some of these ecosystems we land in, are really not that healthy. And you almost become a victim of the ecosystem in some ways. And the worst thing is to sort of be a victim of it, but not able to recognize it, that it's the ecosystem that's impacting the way you think and feel and behave. And it's really powerful to be able to say, wait a minute, let me step out of this ecosystem, at least mentally, and ask yourself, well, okay, well, what's going on here? And do I agree with this? Can I live by this? How is this making me feel? Do I feel good about this? And we're doing an injustice and harm to students. And I always tell in the entrepreneurship class, like, I'm not telling you to like quit your job, your job, and because you need to pay the mortgage and feed but I'm basically creating 8 weeks to 12 weeks where I'm basically asking everybody to say, okay, what do you really want to be doing? Because I don't want you just biding your time and getting a paycheck for the sake of getting a paycheck or biding your time. I believe that everyone has a passion or interest, and so this is sort of like, this is what we should do with kids too, our youth, right? It's like, what do you really want to be doing with your life, and how can I help you live that out or find a way to pursue that? So back to the power of relationships, right? And the networks. I think that when you start to develop relationships with other people that you can talk with about, your feelings and perspectives of the ecosystem you live in, when you're able to find networks of people who think differently and perceive what teaching, learning, and schooling can look like differently, then you're able to kind of step back and ask yourself, okay, maybe this is not the place for me. Or, wow, the stuff that these guys are doing and thinking about, I want to bring into my ecosystem to change it. Because our system of education is really not working for youth right now at all. There are some places, some schools, some learning communities that are very healthy and are really assisting and supporting youth in the development of their authentic selves, helping them pursue their interests and passions. But there's very few. Not only is it not benefiting our kids, it's not benefiting the adults that are attempting to really serve those students. The power of relationships and the power of networks is to not be like in a closet in your system and a victim in it, but to be able to step back and say, well, whoa, wait a minute. I need to converse and talk with other people who I can align my ideals with and my values and see the system for what it is. And then the question is, can you align yourself and find relationships and networks that can help you to envision what's possible for yourself in moving forward as an educator and in life? Because, why do you want to stay in a system that's harming kids for 30 years? It just doesn't make sense.
Yeah, I want to talk about two things that you brought up. There's a lot to unpack there. So the first thing is this idea about operating in a system that doesn't seem to be working, and I couldn't agree with that more. I came from a school background that was fine, but that really emphasized compliance over anything else. And I was fine to comply. I was a good young kid who just sort of did what he was told. But then when I got into teaching and saw how schools tend to serve students and how they served me really when I was younger, I became pretty disillusioned pretty quickly. And I was lucky early on to find big picture schools. And they really allowed me to change my views and education. And I talked about that a little bit in our last episode, and I could talk about that for a long time. But I think what is really critical about what you're saying from a perspective of change agency is that networks allow you to collaborate and talk with individuals that help you realize that just because something is happening doesn't mean that's what should be happening, right? And just because your school is operating under a certain mode or your school is operating under certain policies or has quote unquote, right, there's the enemy of the great educator is the phrase we've always done things this way, is just because your school or you are operating under this similar mode doesn't mean that that's positive for you, for students, or for society, really, as we are trying to support students to change the world to be a better place for maybe their grandkids or their great grandkids. And the second is this convening aspect, which is bringing people together who are sharing kind of a similar schema around what education could be. And it seems to me that that's sort of where the NExT network has kind of boiled out of, is this desire to bring individuals together, I guess, particularly around experiential teaching and learning. Can you just give us a little bit more about what NExT is? And
Well, yeah, I mean, I'm happy about talking about NExT, but I want to actually jump back to the point about these ecosystems because I don't want to leave that topic right away because I think it's really,
sure.
really important. There is an ecosystem at play. The way states oversee education, the way the feds support the states, the way the feds create policies. You can see the outcomes of sort of policies that have gone awry, like NCLB, and just even, and people might hate this, but even the notion that you have like local systems that create public schools that are overseen by a school committee, it's problematic. And I'm not going to go into the details on how that is problematic. I am very pro public schools. I want public funds and public support, giving every student opportunity to be able to thrive and pursue gainful lives and livelihoods. But I think that, you need to go, like, if you live on the ground, you need to step 10,000 feet, 30,000 feet, or 4 miles into the air, or 6 miles in the air, and see the patterns that are wreaking this havoc on students and families. And I just need to go on the record that the entire system is ill-formed, so that we have communities of caring adults working with youth that really are able to support their healthy development and growth, and in particular around their own sense of agency and possibility in life. And I just need to call it out. This is
So you're suggesting that schools need to be better equipped to um, be able to nurture students and nurture families and work with a wider swath of what they're sort of designed to work with right now.
in the best of all worlds. You re-engage communities to kind of think about the learning ecosystems you want to create that really assist and support the positive possibilities for different youth. And it may look different across different but right now there's mandated, sort of like, if I tell you high school, everybody sees exactly the same thing. So this is part of the NExT network. What I will segue into that, but and part of my work, that I feel is really important, besides like working individually, like not unlike you guys, you, Matt, Janine, Mike, Julie, where I ask the question, what is it that you really want to be doing? Right? And how do we get there? I mean, I think I need to, like, ask that of every individual. And then beyond that, I need to go across individuals and communities and basically say to them, you don't have to do school like this. And they're like, well, what do you mean? I'm like,
Right. Just posing that question is itself dumbfounding for many communities.
right. I mean, if you go across the country, you go into any high school, it's pretty much going to look exactly the same. There might be, a very few scattering of high schools that are very different, which I know of, but anyway. And so when I say you don't have to do school differently, people are like, what do you mean? And I said, well, I mean, and this leads into the NExT network, but in my own other piece of work, which is, we'll say, well, let me tell you about a school, which you guys all are familiar with, in Cedar Rapids, Iowa, where there are no classes and no classrooms. And there's 140 or 150 kids who are part of the bottom floor of a startup building. And they're basically doing real world projects in the community. And now the community, 6 or 7 years later, comes and pitches projects to the kids. And when I mean big projects, I'm not talking about like science fair projects. I'm talking about the kids redesigning warehouses for local industries so that they can, be more efficient, or creating surveys with United Way to identify trauma hotspots throughout the city, or designing a $1.3 million pedestrian bridge to go over the river. But like those kids in Cedar, and this is Iowa big, the reality is that there are a few educators around the country who have basically said, yeah, like, what if we don't do school like this? How would we do school? And they've created new ways of thinking about teaching, learning, and schooling. And I think that's the other thing that I go around and is just to basically be like I'm not sure this is the right way to use it, but a Johnny Appleseed, and go around and say, hey, you don't have to do school like this. You can do school like this, X, Y, and Z. And then people are like, wow, I can't believe that. Wow, people are doing school like that. And it kind of blows their mind. Now, I will talk about NExT because that's what you asked about. And I always get back to the things you asked me about, even though it might
Always.
take 15 minutes later. Right? All right. So in a sense, Northeastern prides itself on experiential learning, and rightly so. We know the power of experiential learning, but the question that was raised about 4 or 5 years ago was how much are secondary or how much are K through 12 schools using experiential learning? And, the reality is there is some, but not a lot. Most learning is happening disconnected from the real world and disconnected from students' authentic interest. And so the university, which was fantastic, said, well, what could we do to have an impact in the K through 12 world? And you could have had a response like, well, we know what experiential learning is and we have all the answers, so we'll just tell all the K through 12 educators what they should be doing. But that's, I don't know, that's not the way we work, right? It's like, that doesn't feel good for me and the rest of the university. The reality is there are, as I've already mentioned, there are educators across the country that are doing some incredible things with youth in the name of experiential learning. They're engaged in real world work, industry partnerships, apprenticeships. They're making differences in their community and the world. I mean, there's a lot of experiential learning in these schools that I've mentioned, like OneStone, BV Caps, Iowa Big, the Tacoma schools. There's a bunch of others, right? I mean, you really think about it, is like they're creating a different experience for their students, right? So, what is the experience that they're creating? And then we basically decided that instead of saying, well, we have the answer, all you need to do is what we tell you to do, we said, well, let's bring these incredible, creative, innovative, forward-thinking educators in the K through 12 world that are pushing the envelope and doing school differently and engaging kids in authentic, real-world, student-centered activities, and let's have them be. Let's give them the opportunity to show and share and inspire and empower the other educators across the country who have an interest in pursuing those same things, but are not, but need some images, or as I call images of possibility. Well, there's a bubble of educators across the country that are really moving the needle. And one of the things about being in these little ecosystems is you need to get out of your ecosystem and find out what other people are thinking. And gettingsmart.com is not a bad place to go to learn about that. Back to the point around NExT, the question is like, what really is most helpful is for us, not us to tell other educators what they should do or what experiential learning is, but to bring the people across the country who are really doing some amazing things in their communities and with their students, and create an opportunity for the other educators across the country that are interested in what those educators do, and create a place where they can share practices, share images of possibility. And then when they go back to their communities or their ecosystems, when they want to try to pursue those in their own communities, certainly they could reach out to us. I mean, we've got, in the Graduate School of Education, we have some incredible educators that are working on this area, like Lydia Young and Kelly Kahn and Corliss Thompson and, others, which is fantastic. But the people that we want to network them with is the other educators that are actually doing this. So, for example, when I talk about BB Caps or the Caps Network, I'm happy to talk with them about it. But the best thing I could do is say, hey, you should talk to Corey Moan or Greg Brown or Chad Ralston or any of the other Caps people and talk with them, because guess what? They're doing it. I'm actually not doing it. And if you want to know what you can do or should do or could do to move the needle in your own ecosystem or community, go to the other educators that have been or are doing it in their. So that is the whole premise around NExT, is we believe that experiential learning is incredibly empowering, give agency to youth and students. And then we are trying to find those who are moving the needle in those ecosystems around experiential learning and student agency and student engagement, and helping those students explore and pursue their interests and passions. But we're connecting them, we're connecting other educators who are interested in pursuing that with those educators so that they can learn from them. And so we are a connector. The power is in the network. We don't hold the knowledge. In fact, the expertise and experience lives in the network, not with us. But we are trying to facilitate the relationships and connections so people can feel like, oh, if I want to do this, here are the people I can go to help me think about how I can do it in my own community.
Dr. Unger, I'm curious, how did this get started? Did it get started by professors at the university? Did it get started by K through 12 students, community? And then I'm also curious, you've talked a lot about the benefits of this network. If you could just touch on a little bit of some of the challenges that maybe you guys have faced, it might be helpful, as other people are thinking through networks.
Yeah, I mean, I think there was an invitation to the Graduate School of Education and the faculty there from the President Aoun, and his office. I could go on and on about how we employ experiential learning at Northeastern, but the very real question is, what's happening in K through 12? If we see the power of it in our own institution and across institutions and higher ed, what's happening in K through 12? And so they came to the Graduate School of Education and they asked a number of us and the leadership there, well, what could we do? And the answer was, well, we're not going to, create a bunch of, we're not going to have the answer and do the typical PD and say we have the answers, just listen to us. We said, there's expertise across the network, and in fact the power is that there are educators who are moving the needle across the country, but they're disconnected. And one of the problems in education is that you can be in your ecosystem and we don't know all the incredible things that are happening across the country. When I go around and I tell people, did you think about doing school like this or this or this or this? People their jaws drop basically and say, are there really people doing school like that? That just, it always amazes me. Like there's no mechanism really, unless, again, plug for Getting Smart, you're actually reading Getting Smart and you're saying, oh my gosh, there's like a whole bunch of educators across the country that are actually thinking about school like this and doing school like this. And it's incredibly empowering. It might be deflating too, because you're saying, well, why isn't my system, my school doing this? Then that's when I start to think about the individual person and what can I do to help them think about what is the trajectory that they want to have to make a difference.
What's next, maybe with NExT, or what's on the horizon for your plans? What kind of network building or what networks are you hoping to take advantage of? Or, I guess just what's next?
Yeah, so I think that one of the things that we've started to work on, and I think is actually really, really powerful, is to think about, we've had the last 3 summers, we've had a summer institute where educators from across the country come to Boston on campus for 2.5 or 3 days. And it's incredible. It's incredibly energizing for me to be, frankly, we going out for a beer with a bunch of these folks that are just pushing the envelope in education and talking shop about like how do we even make more of a dent in the system of education. You bring them together, but not everybody can come to Boston, in the middle of summer with, can I get the monies to go? And the hotels are expensive, although we have dorm space usually, and the flights, and it's the middle of summer. I've got my kids and all that kind of stuff. So we've started to create some local sort of gatherings, pop-ups. In Charlotte, we've done this for a couple of years now. Seattle, we've done it for a couple of years. So instead of having to fly across the country in the middle of the summer, like in Charlotte this last November, we had a one-day pop-up with educators that were all over from North Carolina and South Carolina. And you don't have to, you drive up, we spend the day together. People are sharing what they're doing. People get super jazzed. We've done that for a couple of years now in Seattle in March. Again, local, highlighting local schools, local educators doing incredible things, which is even kind of cooler because then you're like, wow, these guys are up the road from me. I should go visit what they're doing, right? It's like they're not across the entire country. But I think that one thing that we need to continue to think about is how we can create more local pop-ups. I know that this last March, we were going to run an event in New Hampshire that had a number of educators who are very interested in convening and coming together around deeper learning and experiential learning. And one of the cool things about it, right? Like, it's not us Northeastern people who are standing on a platform telling and preaching what we think other people would do. We were basically convening educators to showcase and share what they were doing in their own local communities or local schools or classrooms and ecosystems. And we were just convening everybody in the middle of, at the Upper Valley Educator Institute in Lebanon, New Hampshire. And we had 60 people signed up without much marketing at all, who were going to come and share what they were doing to move the needle around student agency, student engagement, deeper learning. Unfortunately, COVID came, so it was a judgment call on ours. We hoped to do it in October, but we weren't able to do it. But within a month, people found out about this convening, the opportunity to learn from each other. And I thought that was incredibly powerful, that the people from across Vermont, New Hampshire wanted to travel 2 or 3 hours. We had some people even from the coast of Maine that were going to travel 4 hours, simply to say, hey, I heard about this really cool school in Upper Vermont that's got this J term thing. If you look up J term and Getting Smart, I hate to plug that in. But anyway, the point being is, it was like, oh, I want to hear from those guys. And we are like trying to inspire and empower educators and in the classroom level, the school level, the district level, think about doing school, teaching, learning, and schooling differently, but by connecting them with one another. And I think in terms of what's next, I think if we can do more of that locally, so there's more access to that. And then we're also playing with the notion of how do you create those convenings or connections virtually. So we're playing with some ideas. We don't have all the answers. We're trying things out.
Just gonna say, yeah, I've been thinking about how can we bring all these different networks together? Like if there was like one place to house them, or like the network of all networks that like kind of listed or had access to all these different things that are happening like locally and nationally, like all in one place, just to make it more accessible for educators that are looking to rethink education and do something differently.
There are a number of sort of networks that are actively talking with one another right now about how to engage all stakeholders in the question of what would you like to see in the future, and how can we all work, including all stakeholders, and what role can networks play, are reimagining what school and schooling can look like when we come back from the COVID context.
A big takeaway from what I hear that you're saying, Chris, is that there's a certain hunger out there amongst educators, and even more, I think, educators that don't even realize it, right? I've experienced it so many times where I've talked to a new teacher or even a veteran teacher and said, "Hey, have you ever thought about this?" And their like mind is blown and they're like, "No." And then all of a sudden their practice is revolutionized, right? Just by asking somebody to think about things in maybe slightly a different way. So that leads me to believe that there are educators out there, to your point way earlier, which was educators are a unique group of people because are typically getting into education to make some sort of change in the world, right? To empower the minds of young people, to do things that will change the future of the world in some way. And a lot of educators, I think, and that I maybe it's just the feedback group that I'm running in, tend to think that schools can be doing a better job. But there's often not a lot of access to other individuals they feel that also feel that same way.
Mhm.
So by allowing access to other individuals like maybe yourself or maybe our, co-hosting group here or other folks in the industry of education who are really doing things differently, it all of a sudden turns this person's, maybe initial thoughts about possibly doing things differently to like whoa, this is actually happening. There are actually people who are doing it differently. And then all of a sudden, thoughts and seeds are planted that, grow into giant blossoms of let's really make this happen. And that cycle, I think, perpetuates really important activity in education all around the country. And I think to Janine's point about the network of networks is that it's super critical that individuals like this connect with one another because it can be, I think, and I see it often, it can be really daunting to be the only teacher in your school who's trying to do things a little bit differently. It can be super daunting if you're feeling like you're on an island and isolated in your practice on a regular basis. And that's what I see as some of the power of networks here really being is that you're able to kind of grapple with your problems with like-minded individuals. You're able to bring people onto your team that you may not have thought about thought about being possible before, and those individuals become your thought partners and your personal board of directors and whomever, the people that are pushing you and encouraging you but also supporting you as you try to do things a little bit differently in your own life. um, just curious about how a person might join the NExT network.
Well, I mean, easy. Just email next, NEXT, at northeastern.edu and say, hey, I want to know more and can I get connected? And then you're in the network. Then we try to send out regular newsletters and updates about what's going on. I do want to say, want to build on something, Mike, that you said. I want to kind of take note of. You started at the very beginning of this saying, the power of the network of schools. But then at this last instance, you talked about the power or need for educators to connect with one another. And I think if you are an educator in a school or a school system and you're thinking to yourself, wow, edit it out if you want. This sucks.
Well,
This really sucks. Well, there are others out there who have said the same thing and are finding ways to do things differently. You need to find that there are you need to like connect with other people. Again, individuals. You guys are connected. You're connected with me. Ben Owens, who runs Open Way Learning, I'm connected with him. Mike, you're talking with him. I'm connected with Corey Moan and BV Caps, with Chad Carlson at One Stone, John Kettler and Kristen Tinder in Tacoma Schools. You know, when it comes down to it, and I started this whole thing, you will see I always wrap around. It sounds like I'm meandering all over the list, which I am, but I do circle back. You're laughing because I do.
Always.
You know, I do that.
Always.
Who are those kindred spirits and allies and comrades that I can go to who can reinvigorate my sense of purpose and help me find my way in what I want to do with my life and how I want to make a difference in the world? It sounds totally crazy, maybe, but the reality is those are important questions, I think. And instead of trying to figure it out on your own, reach out to others, make connections, find out who else is thinking the same thing, find others that you can call colleagues and comrades so that you can start doing the things that you want to do and making the difference you want to make.
I think this episode really has been all about how networks have helped Chris Unger kind of rethink what's going on out there, whether that's personal networks or networks of schools like we've been talking about here. And Janine, Julie, and Matt, as we sit here and we've been listening to all of this, let's talk about some of our takeaways. How has what Chris has been talking about here helped us kind of rethink education?
There's obviously a ton there, and I definitely got some great Ungerisms to think about and to ponder. But the image that's in my mind that's sort of stuck there is the image of a needle moving, because that's something that Dr. Unger said again and again, like, how are we going to move the needle? And I think that image is really helpful. How's it going to move? And sort of the needle's not going to move by itself. So what's going to push it? And where's it going? And what's the direction? So it's not just going to sort of go to, the abyss, but it's going to a direction that I've been sort of thinking about. And like I said in the last episode, I haven't really grasped and taken account of the power of networks. And this sort of made me think and reflect, like, the network can help move that needle in a more powerful way than one person can do on their own. And yeah, I'm just really thankful for that, and just going to think about that a little bit more.
Yeah, I can really appreciate making connections with people, like individual people, but then also expanding on those to make these bigger networks. I mean, I always have this idea that we can do more together than we can ever alone. So it is great to try and find like-minded people, surround yourself with those people that are going to, lead the charge with you. And then I keep coming back to this idea that if we can connect the networks, that because again, just being able to do more together, and just being on the same page, and just, I don't know, I'm thinking like education in like I don't know, hopefully it doesn't take that long, but 20 years time, that all throughout the country, or all throughout the world, there, we'll be sharing different things, exciting things that are happening, and no two schools are really going to look alike, that they're all going to look different. It would just be totally flipped.
I'm thinking about, school outside the box, and how Chris has highlighted some schools who really are doing school differently right now. And I think having those relationships, for me, has really helped me see, not just outside of my own classroom, but sort of like up and around corners, things I didn't know existed before. Gives you a new idea, definitely improves my own practice, and also professionally has given me, lots of opportunities to say yes to things that have come my way that I would not have known about otherwise. So that's what I would say is it's an encouraging thing to think about is that there are schools doing it well. They're rethinking education. Just in case we haven't said that yet. But those relationships, they're really priceless to me. And Janine, I think you're onto something there.
Yeah, I would add to that it's the relationships that are built into the networks that are really fueling my fire to do things differently in education, and really pushing me to think about like what's possible. If this is what we have right now, and we know it's not working for as many students as we think it should be working for, then what's really possible, and who's doing that work? How do I get in connected with those people? And then how do we do that work together? Last segment here is our plug. Janine, what do you want to plug?
All right, I'm going to plug united3d.org.
Okay.
One of our former students, Arnav, he and a couple other members of his team are working on creating PPE for healthcare workers using their 3D printers. So
cool.
Yeah, united3d.org. You can volunteer to help out. You can donate to help with the cause, or even if you have a 3D printer, they will give you instructions on what you can do. So you can volunteer to help in a lot of different ways.
That's awesome. Julie, what are you plugging?
Well, I would like to plug Open Up Education, since Chris had mentioned Tri-County Early College down in North Carolina, written by Adam Hagler and his co-author Ben Owens.
Cool. Matt, what are you plugging?
Yeah, I'm going to plug Jamboard. It's a Google product that goes to a hardware, like a computer screen that's pretty expensive, but you still use the software without getting the expensive hardware. And it's basically like a whiteboard. So in all these virtual meetings these days, and you can get Jamboard in your Google Suite, and then you can share out your whiteboard, and you can collaborate and share your screen. So yeah, it's a pretty cool tool.
Cool. All right, Chris Unger, what are you going to plug this fine evening?
Why don't I plug you guys?
So everybody should listen to Rethink EDU. Yeah.
Well, more than that, I mean, think about everything that we've been talking about tonight, right? You need to find out other people. You need allies. You need comrades. You need to create relationships. If you're listening to this and you think, wow, this is kind of cool. Who are these guys? Matt, Janine, Julie, Mike. Guess what? Email them. Call them. Say, here's who I am. This is where I'm at. This is what I'm thinking. You guys and we together created an incubator in Philadelphia in November, I think it was, where we brought individual educators together or individuals together and saying, hey, what is the thing you would like to manifest in the world? And we're basically, let's take these ideas and put them into practice. You guys are living it. You guys are connecting. You're building on your relationships with one another to actually manifest this. You're building your relationship with me, which is fantastic. And I feel fortunate to have the relationship with you guys. And, if you're looking to connect and if you take this podcast to heart, reach out to Julie, Janine, Matt, and Mike and say, hey, I this kind of resonated with me. I don't know what I want to do or I think I know what to do, but I need people to help me think about this. So the invitation, the plug is to connect with these guys and figure out what it is you want to do in the world and how do you want to make a difference, and invite them into the conversation to help you think about how you can realize what it is you want to do.
I want to thank you, Chris, for joining us this evening. It's been a real pleasure to have you. Before we head on out, I guess I haven't plugged anything. So I'm going to plug actually a new network of networks. Janine, this one is for you. It's called Go Boundless. So this is a startup effort of Ted Dintersmith and Ken Robinson and Emily Leitag. And their whole purpose of creating Go Boundless is to bring networks together and individuals together to sort of rethink education, right? So some of their partners right now, and it's really just on the ground level, but are some of these networks that we're talking about. So they've got big picture learning on board. They've got Most Likely to Succeed, High Tech High, PBL Works, EL Education, the Learning Policy Institute. So you're talking about a lot of different networks of schools that are really pushing the envelope to try to do things differently, coming together under Go Boundless's toolage here. So if you check them out, they're called Go Boundless. It's just goboundless.org. Have a look at their website. I just signed up for their newsletter a couple days ago. It's really at the ground level. So super cool, super exciting. And thanks everybody for listening to this episode of Rethinking EDU. Be sure to hit us back for our next couple episodes, which are also going to focus on networks and the power of networks. Matt, Julie, and Janine, always a pleasure. Chris, thanks for joining us. Thanks everybody for listening.